He listens without judging. That's what she told me, her eyes soft, her voice almost reverent, like she was talking about some saint who descended into her life to heal wounds I didn't even know she had. But do you know where I found him? Not in a cafe. Not at a park bench. Not in a moment of vulnerability where maybe, just maybe, I could have forgiven her for needing someone else to talk to. No. I found him in my closet. My closet. Standing between my shirts and my jackets, close enough to smell the faint trace of my cologne on the fabric, judging me with the kind of smirk that said he thought he'd already won. That's when I realized two things at once. One, my wife had let him into my home, into my sacred spaces. And two, whatever story she had been telling herself about just talking, had been stretched, warped, and shattered by the sheer audacity of that man hiding in my closet. Let me rewind before you think I'm the kind of guy who jumps to conclusions. My wife had always been the talker between us. She had a way of turning her feelings into paragraphs, weaving them into stories that made sense even when the world didn't. I was more of the listener. Or at least I thought I was. But she started saying I didn't really listen, that I jumped too quickly to solutions, that I didn't sit in the discomfort of her feelings the way she needed me to. You always want to fix things, she said once. But sometimes I just want to be heard. I thought I was hearing her. But apparently I wasn't. That's when she found him. Or maybe I should say he found her. Some coworker. Some friend of a friend. I don't even know anymore because every time I asked she'd wave it off like it didn't matter. He just listens without judging, she'd say, and my stomach would knot because it sounded like a compliment wrapped in a comparison. Without judging, as though judgment was all she got from me. At first I thought it was harmless. Everyone needs someone to vent to, right? God knows I had my buddies. The ones I'd complain to about work, about traffic, about life. So I let it slide. But slowly I started noticing things. The way her phone would light up with his name late at night. The way she'd smile, just a little differently when she texted him. The way she'd repeat his words like they were pearls of wisdom. I could never come up with myself. Then came the moment that tore the floor out from under me. It was a Thursday. I came home early from work. The house quiet. I remember thinking it was strange she hadn't mentioned having anyone over. I walked down the hall, headed toward our bedroom, and something, call it instinct, call it paranoia, made me stop. The closet door was shut, and I swear I heard the faintest creak, like someone shifting their weight. I opened it, and there he was. Not sitting, not ducking, standing tall like he owned the place. His eyes met mine without flinching, and the first thing I noticed wasn't fear. It was judgment. Judgment in the set of his jaw, the tilt of his head, the way his gaze swept over me like he was cataloging my failures. I froze. My brain scrambled for logic, for some explanation that didn't make me the fool. But before I could speak, she walked in. She saw me, saw him, and instead of screaming or panicking or even apologizing, she said it again, her voice trembling but certain. He listens without judging. I think my heart stopped in that moment. Because what she meant, I realized, was that he listened to her without judging. But he sure as hell was judging me. Now tell me, how would you react? Would you swing? Would you drag him out by the collar and throw him into the street? Would you demand she explain why the hell another man was in your closet, in your home, in your marriage? I didn't do any of those things. I just stood there, my hands shaking, and I laughed. A bitter, broken laugh. The kind you hear in movies right before the villain snaps. Because the absurdity of it all, the audacity, was too much to process in any other way. She reached for me then, her eyes wide, pleading. It's not what you think. Not what I think. The man was in my closet. What else could it possibly be? I looked at him, then back at her. Get him out, I said. My voice was flat, cold, the kind of tone that scared even me. She hesitated, and in that hesitation I knew. Whatever lines had been drawn, whatever boundaries had been broken, it wasn't just about listening anymore. She hadn't stumbled into this. She'd chosen it. Chosen it. That night I slept on the couch. Not because I was banished, but because the bed we shared felt poisoned. I lay there staring at the ceiling, trying to piece together when it started, when she decided my words weren't enough, when she decided his silence was more valuable than my effort. And you know what kept echoing in my head? That one phrase. He listens without judging. The next day I couldn't stop myself. I asked her outright, what does he know about you that I don't? She looked down, twisting her hands. He knows what it feels like to be misunderstood. He knows what it's like to want someone to just sit with your feelings instead of trying to change them. And I thought, that's it. That's what you traded me for. But maybe it wasn't about the words. Maybe it was about present. About the way he made her feel heard, even if he had nothing worth saying. Still, the betrayal cut deep, not just because she let him in, but because she let him judge me from my own damn closet. That was part one, the beginning of the unraveling. And trust me, it only got stranger, darker, and more complicated from there. Because once you discover your wife's confidant has literally stepped into your clothes, breathing your air, standing in the shadows where only you belong, you start to wonder not just what else he's seen, but what else she's willing to let him do. I didn't speak to either of them for the rest of that night. Not a word. He left without a fight, which almost made it worse. He didn't slink out, ashamed, like a man caught somewhere he shouldn't. No, he walked out calmly like he'd been invited, like he belonged, like this was just some minor misunderstanding that would soon pass. That calmness ate at me, because in his mind, he wasn't trespassing. He was entitled. The silence after he left was louder than any screaming match we could have had. She sat at the edge of the bed, twisting her fingers together while I stayed in the doorway, my body buzzing with a cocktail of rage, disbelief, and the kind of pain that makes you feel hollow. Finally, I asked the only question that mattered. How long has this been going on? She didn't answer right away. That hesitation, that pause, it was its own confession. When she finally spoke, her voice cracked. A few months. Months of him listening to her words that I never heard. Months of her smiling at her phone when I thought she was scrolling through news or recipes. Months of secrets being whispered in a voice I used to believe was mine alone. I should have shouted. I should have thrown something. But I didn't. Instead, I sat down across from her, leaned forward, and asked the second question that had been gnawing at me since I found him in the closet. Why here? Why our home? Her eyes filled with tears. Because it felt safe. Safe. That word nearly broke me. She had turned the place I built, the place I worked my ass off to provide, into a sanctuary for him, for them, my home, my rules, my marriage, used against me. I didn't sleep that night either. Instead, I lay awake on the couch again, replaying every conversation we'd had over the last year. Every moment she claimed she was just tired. Every time she brushed off my questions with a distracted smile. The puzzle pieces rearranged themselves in the dark, forming a picture I didn't want to see. The next morning, I called in sick to work. Not because I was sick, but because I couldn't function. I needed clarity, answers, and maybe, if I'm honest, I wanted revenge. So I called him. His number wasn't hard to find. I'd seen it light up her phone enough times. My hands shook as I dialed, my jaw clenched so tight I thought my teeth might crack. He answered on the second ring, his voice calm, collected, like he'd been expecting me. Hello? This is her husband, I said. No introduction, no pleasantries, just the truth. There was a pause, then a quiet chuckle. I figured this day would come. The arrogance in his voice set my blood on fire. You think this is a game? Hiding in my closet? Walking into my home like you own it? I didn't hide, he said, his tone maddeningly casual. I stood there, because I have nothing to be ashamed of. I nearly dropped the phone. Nothing to be ashamed of? He was sleeping with another man's wife. No, worse. He was in my closet, in my life, in my marriage, and he claimed no shame. That's when it hit me. This wasn't just about her needing someone to listen. This was about him believing he was better than me. He judged me. He judged the way I listened, the way I loved, the way I existed in her life. And in her eyes, maybe he was winning. I told him to meet me, not at my house, not anywhere she could interfere. Neutral ground, a cafe downtown. He agreed, almost too easily. When I walked in, he was already there. Lean, sharp suit, smug smile. The kind of man who thrives on appearances. He didn't look like a villain, not the way you'd imagine one. But that's the thing about betrayal. It rarely wears a mask. We sat down, and before I could speak, he leaned in. She deserves to be hurt. She deserves loyalty. I snapped. She deserves a husband who loves her. And she has that. What she doesn't deserve is a parasite who feeds off cracks in someone else's marriage. He smirked. If there are cracks, that's on you. Those words dug deeper than anything she'd said. Because a part of me feared he was right. Maybe I had failed her. Maybe I had left her so starved for connection that she had no choice but to find it elsewhere. But then again, she did have a choice, and so did he. I left the cafe without throwing a punch, though God knows I wanted to. Instead, I went home and told her everything. That I'd met him, that I'd heard his version of events, that I knew this wasn't just about listening. This was about her choosing him over me in ways I couldn't forgive. She broke down then, said she didn't love him, said it was never physical, just emotional, said she didn't know how it got this far. But whether she kissed him or not didn't matter anymore, because betrayal isn't measured in touches, it's measured in secrets, in lies, in the sound of another man's voice echoing through my house. That night, I told her something I'd never said before. I can't compete with a ghost of who you think he is. Either he's gone, completely gone, or I am. She swore she'd end it, swore she'd block him, cut ties, rebuild what we lost, and maybe part of me wanted to believe her. But trust, once broken, doesn't snap back into place. It lingers, jagged, sharp, waiting to cut you again. That's where part 2 ends. Me standing at the edge of a cliff, unsure if I should jump into the unknown of leaving, or risk staying and bleeding slowly from wounds that might never heal. The morning I finally made my decision, the house was unnervingly still. She was in the kitchen making coffee, humming to herself as if humming could erase what had been said, what had been done. The smell of roasted beans filled the air, but instead of comfort, it carried with it a heaviness that reminded me of sleepless nights and whispered lies. I sat at the table watching her back as she moved. It hit me then. This was the same woman I had once chased across a college quad. The same woman whose life could pull me out of the darkest moods. The same woman who once swore I was her safe place. And yet here we were, me at the table, her with her secrets, and between us a chasm neither of us knew how to cross. She turned, handed me a mug, and for a moment I almost reached for it like nothing was wrong. But I didn't. I looked her dead in the eye and said, "I can't live like this anymore." The mug trembled in her hand, spilling a drop of coffee onto the counter. "What do you mean?" she asked, though she knew exactly what I meant. "I mean I can't keep waking up wondering if he's still in your head. I can't keep fighting ghosts in my own home." Her eyes filled instantly. "I told you I ended it. I blocked him. I haven't spoken to him since." I cut her off. "But he's still here, don't you get? He's in the way you talk, the way you compare, the way you look at me like I'm not enough. He's in every silence between us. And as long as that's true, we'll never be us again." She sat down across from me, tears running freely now. "I never meant to hurt you. I felt so unseen." And he filled that space. I wanted to tell her that her reasoning didn't matter, that betrayal isn't softened by the excuses wrapped around it. But instead I asked the question that had haunted me since the closet. "Do you love him?" She shook her head violently. "No, it was never about love. It was about needing someone to hold space for me, to listen." "Then why couldn't that someone be me?" I asked. My voice cracked on the words. She had no answer. That silence was all I needed. I stood, went upstairs and pulled out a suitcase. The sound of the zipper echoed through the house like a final bell. She followed me, sobbing, begging, grabbing at my arms. But I kept packing. Shirts, jeans, socks. It didn't matter what I threw in. It was the act of leaving that counted. "Please," she cried. "Don't do this. We can fix it. We can go to counseling. We can..." But I shook my head. Counseling can't erase a man standing in my closet. Counseling can't erase the look on your face when you said he listens better than me. Her sobs broke into wails, but my resolve only grew strong. For years I had been her anchor, but now I realized she had cut the rope herself. As I carried the suitcase down the stairs, my daughter's photograph caught my eye on the wall. Her little smile, gap-toothed and innocent, nearly unraveled me. Because this wasn't just about me and her mother. This was about the family we had built, the children caught in the middle of fractures they didn't cause. I stopped, my hand gripping the banister. Could I really walk away? Could I really dismantle everything we had built over one betrayal? But then I remembered his smirk, his arrogance, his audacity to stand in my closet and judge me. And I knew, yes, I could. Because staying would mean living in a cage of suspicion. And that wasn't a life worth living. When I reached the door, she whispered behind me, "So that's it? You're just leaving?" I turned, my suitcase heavy in my hand. "No," I said quietly. "You left first. I'm just catching up." And with that I walked out. The weeks that followed were brutal. I slept on a friend's couch at first, then found a small apartment with peeling paint and a draft in the windows. It was nothing like the home I'd left behind, but it was mine, and for the first time in months, maybe years, I could breathe. She called often, sometimes to cry, sometimes to beg, sometimes to rage. I answered at first, but eventually I stopped, because every word from her felt like a rope tugging me back into a place I no longer belonged. The kids, that was the hardest part, explaining to them why Dad wasn't at the breakfast table anymore, why Mom's eyes were red every morning. I told them the truth, in pieces, that Mom and Dad still loved them, but we couldn't live together right now. That sometimes adults break promises, but it doesn't mean they stop loving their children. It wasn't the story I ever wanted to tell, but it was the story we had. And over time, I began to heal, slowly. I learned to enjoy silence without suspicion, to drink coffee without tasting betrayal, to stand in front of my closet without seeing another man's shadow there. Do I still think about her words? Yes, he listens without judging. They echo sometimes in the back of my mind, especially when I catch myself jumping to solutions instead of listening. But instead of breaking me, those words remind me of something important. Relationships die not from one big blow, but from the tiny ways we fail to show up for each other. I don't excuse her betrayal, but I've come to understand it. She wanted to be heard. I wanted to be right. Somewhere in the middle, we lost each other. Now, when I sit across from someone I care about, I force myself to really listen, not to fix, not to judge, but to be present. Because if my story has taught me anything, it's that silence can kill faster than anger. So yes, I lost her. I lost the home we built, the marriage we promised, the life I thought was unshakable, but I gained something too. The knowledge that love isn't about being perfect, it's about paying attention. And maybe one day, when the pain fades, I'll meet someone new, and when she talks, I'll listen, truly listen. Because I'll never again let someone feel they have to find comfort in another man's closet. That's the end of my story. Messy, painful, human, and maybe, just maybe, the beginning of something better.